You two. IDs, right now.
On what grounds, officer? We just having breakfast.
I got a call. 2 suspicious men. That's my grounds. IDs, I won't ask again.
You walked past every single person in here and came straight to us. Nobody else, just the 2 black men in the corner. You already know how that looks.
Sheriff Kevin O'Brien was already standing over the booth when James Myrone looked up. No greeting, no introduction. His hand rested on his duty belt, and his shadow fell across the table before either man had fully registered that he was there. He told them to produce identification, not a question. Not a request, a demand, delivered to 2 men who had done nothing except order breakfast and sit down. James looked up from his coffee slowly. He asked, "On what grounds?" O'Brien leaned forward. He said that in Harlan County his word was the only grounds that mattered. What Sheriff Kevin O'Brien did not know what he was about to find out in front of a full diner and a body camera recording every syllable was that the 2 men he was standing over were state police detectives currently on active duty, and that the next 11 minutes would end his career, produce nearly $2 million in legal settlements, and attach his name permanently to one of the most documented examples of racial profiling the county had ever seen. Before we get into what happened, let us know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. And if you're new here, subscribe and hit the bell. Stories like this one go up every week. Rosewood Grill had been on the same corner of Harlan County for 21 years. The coffee arrived before you asked for it. The booths had regulars. The walls had photographs of the neighborhood taken back when the neighborhood looked different. It was the kind of place people came to on quiet mornings when they needed an hour before the day demanded anything of them. James Myrone arrived first. He was 40 years old, 14 years with the state police, currently embedded in a joint narcotics task force operating across 3 counties. He chose the booth near the back window out of habit, the kind of habit that develops in people who spend years doing work that requires them to see what's coming. David Goodman arrived 12 minutes later. 36 years old, 11 years on the force, same unit, he slid into the seat across from James without looking at the menu. They had been to Rosewood Grill enough times that ordering required no thought. On the table between them, 2 coffee cups, a folded set of handwritten case notes, and a half-eaten plate of eggs going cold. They were dressed plain clothes, jeans, jackets, nothing that announced anything. They were not hiding, they were working. The distinction mattered, and the details made it plain without needing to be stated. The diner that morning held maybe 14 customers. A couple sat near the front window. An older man had a folded newspaper at the counter. A woman with a laptop occupied a corner table. It was quiet. It was ordinary. It was the kind of morning where nothing dramatic is supposed to happen. Kevin O'Brien was 52 years old and had spent 22 years with the Harlan County Sheriff's Department. He was known in the community. Known well enough that most people, when they saw him coming, adjusted their behavior without being asked to. His personnel file told a different story than the one he told about himself. 4 formal complaints over the past decade, each one filed by a black resident, each one describing a stop or confrontation that had no lawful basis, every complaint reviewed, every one closed without action. The pattern sat in a filing cabinet inside the department's administrative office, documented in black ink and completely ignored. The dispatch call came in at 9:11 that morning. A customer at Rosewood Grill had contacted the non-emergency line. 2 suspicious black men, the caller said, watching the street, possibly planning to target the bank on the next block. No crime described, no specific behavior, no evidence of anything. O'Brien took the call without asking a single follow-up question and drove directly to the diner. He walked through the door at 9:17. His eyes moved across the room once. They passed over the couple near the window. They passed over the man at the counter and the woman at the laptop. They stopped on James and David. He walked to their booth without pausing, without speaking to the waitress, without watching the 2 men for even a few seconds. He had not observed them, he had identified them. There is a difference, and the body camera on his chest would later make that difference impossible to argue. He told them to produce identification. James stated, clearly and without confrontation, that the officer had presented no probable cause and that they were not legally required to comply. David said the same. O'Brien's expression did not change. He repeated the demand, his voice dropping lower. He said he needed cooperation, and he was not getting it. James and David exchanged a brief look. Then both men reached into their wallets. They were professionals, and they understood that the measured response was sometimes the correct one, not because the demand was lawful, but because the situation called for precision, not escalation. James stated aloud, for the record, that they were providing identification without admitting any obligation to do so, and that the officer had not established probable cause. David confirmed the same. Both IDs were placed flat on the table. O'Brien picked them up without acknowledgement and walked outside. The diner had grown noticeably quieter. The couple near the window had stopped talking. The woman with the laptop had stopped typing. A waitress near the serving counter stood with her hands at her sides, not moving. 3 customers had their phones out. 4 minutes later, O'Brien returned. Both IDs were clean, no warrants, no criminal records, nothing. He dropped them onto the table without looking at either man and told them they needed to leave. David looked up and stated plainly that they had not committed any offense and that the officer had no legal authority to remove them from a private establishment. O'Brien's jaw tightened. His response came quietly, without heat, almost casual in its delivery. He told them that their type always found a way eventually. He said he would rather not be around when they did. The sentence landed and stayed there. 6 phones were now recording openly across the diner. The morning, which had started as nothing, had become something that none of the people inside Rosewood Grill would forget. O'Brien did not move after he said it. He stood over the booth with the words still in the air between them and waited, as though he expected the statement to produce the result the badge and the demands had not. James did not raise his voice. He did not reach for his phone. He addressed O'Brien directly and worked through each violation in sequence: the demand for identification without probable cause, the attempt to remove them from a private establishment without legal grounds, and now a statement that had named their race as the reason for suspicion. He said each of these things at a measured pace, clearly enough for the body camera clipped to O'Brien's chest to capture every word without distortion. David added one point to close: that everything O'Brien had said and done since walking through the door was on record, and that they intended to make sure the right people saw it. O'Brien did not retreat. He stepped closer. Frank DeLuca had been watching from behind the counter since the moment O'Brien walked in. He had owned Rosewood Grill for 21 years. 58 years old, broad-shouldered, not a man who looked for confrontation. But there are moments that make the choice for you. He had heard enough. He stepped out from behind the counter, crossed the floor, and stopped a few feet from the booth. He addressed O'Brien without hostility. He said the 2 men had been in the diner since 8:30. They had ordered without incident. They had been quiet and respectful throughout. He asked what the basis for the situation actually was. O'Brien turned on him before he finished the sentence. He stated that interfering with official business was a criminal offense. He said that if Frank spoke again, he would be in handcuffs before the next word left his mouth. Frank went quiet, but he did not leave. He stayed where he was, close enough to see everything, and he did not look away. That choice to stay silent but remain present meant that what was about to happen would have a witness who was neither a detective nor a bystander. A business owner standing in his own diner, watching 2 of his customers be threatened by a sheriff whose IDs check had come back with nothing. O'Brien turned back to the booth. His hand moved to the handcuffs on his belt. The motion was slow and deliberate. He unclipped them with a single snap that carried across the quiet room. He told James and David they had one final opportunity to stand up and leave without being arrested. He said what happened next was their choice. The cuffs hung visibly from his right hand. 6 phones were recording. The diner was completely still. James and David looked at each other across the table. The look lasted less than 2 seconds. It was not fear. It was recognition. 2 men who had responded to situations exactly like this one, from the other side of it, and who understood with complete clarity what was happening and what came next. The decision was already made before O'Brien finished the sentence. Before this story moves forward, here's a question worth thinking about. Do you believe one single complaint filed against an officer should automatically trigger mandatory retraining? Drop A for yes or B for no in the comments. Because what follows is exactly what 4 ignored complaints eventually cost. O'Brien stepped forward. He reached toward James's arm. Both men moved at the same moment. Not quickly, not urgently. Their hands went inside their jackets and came back out holding badges. Gold shields, both of them held level and steady. James spoke first. He stated his full name, his rank, his department, and his unit, Detective James Myrone, State Police Narcotics Task Force, currently on active duty. David followed immediately. Detective David Goodman, same unit, same status. O'Brien's hand stopped in midair. He did not speak. His arm remained extended, suspended in a motion he could no longer complete, while the diner absorbed what had just been said. The woman near the window placed her hand over her mouth. The man at the counter set down his fork. Frank DeLuca stood very still at the end of the booth. The story O'Brien had walked into Rosewood Grill carrying 2 suspicious men, a call from a concerned citizen, a straightforward removal had just ceased to exist. What replaced it was documented, recorded, and held in the hands of 2 state detectives who had now identified themselves on camera in front of witnesses after being threatened with arrest for eating breakfast. James addressed him one final time. He said they had told him from the beginning there was no probable cause. They had told him their rights were being violated. They had told him they were having breakfast. He paused. He said the body camera on O'Brien's chest had recorded all of it. David looked directly at the camera and confirmed they would be requesting the full footage. O'Brien left without another word. The door closed behind him. The diner did not immediately return to normal. It held the weight of what had just happened for a long moment. Then Frank walked to the booth and stood at the edge of it. He said he was sorry it had happened in his place. James told him it was not his fault and asked whether they could have the security footage from that morning and the contact information of anyone willing to give a statement. Frank told them they would have everything they needed. Outside in the parking lot, O'Brien sat alone in his vehicle, both hands on the steering wheel, engine off, staring straight ahead at nothing in particular, while inside the diner, the story of the morning that would follow him for the rest of his life was already being documented. James made the call from the booth while the coffee sat cold in front of him. Lieutenant Graves picked up on the second ring. James walked him through the sequence without editorializing the dispatch call, the ID demand without probable cause, the explicit racial remark, the handcuff threat, the intimidation of the diner owner. He ended by requesting that O'Brien's body camera footage be flagged and secured before the end of the shift. Graves listened without interrupting. His response took 4 seconds. O'Brien was being pulled from active duty within the hour, pending a full internal affairs review. James and David stayed and finished their breakfast. The food was cold and the coffee had gone flat. They ate anyway. Walking out unfinished would have meant leaving something behind that didn't belong to Kevin O'Brien. Before they left the building, Frank had produced a USB drive with the full security recording from that morning. 8 customers had provided their contact details and offered their phone footage without being asked. The evidence chain was complete before either detective stood up from the booth. By that evening, the footage was online. 4 separate clips, all recorded from different angles inside Rosewood Grill. The clearest one, O'Brien unclipping his handcuffs, then 2 gold badges rising into frame, was shared 400,000 times in the first 12 hours. By the end of the week, the combined footage had been viewed 18 million times. National news outlets picked it up under headlines that wrote themselves. Harlan County became a name attached to a story the county would spend years trying to separate itself from. Internal Affairs completed its review in under a month. The body camera footage was unambiguous. Every demand was on it, every dismissal, the remark, the handcuffs, the frozen hand. It played back from O'Brien's own chest, recorded on department-issued equipment exactly as it had happened. Investigators then pulled his full personnel file. 4 formal complaints, 10 years, each one filed by a black resident, each one describing racial targeting without legal cause. Each one reviewed, documented, and closed without consequence. The pattern was not hidden. It had been sitting in a filing cabinet inside the department's administrative office the entire time O'Brien continued working patrol, continued making stops, and continued accumulating a record the institution around him chose not to address. 3 weeks after the morning at Rosewood Grill, the department announced its decision. Kevin O'Brien was terminated. The official findings cited repeated violations of constitutional policing standards, a demonstrated pattern of racially discriminatory conduct, and the use of arrest threats without lawful justification. He filed 2 appeals, both were denied. No law enforcement agency in the state offered him a position. His name, now permanently attached to 18 million views of footage, appeared in every background check run on him for the rest of his working life. James and David filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against O'Brien and the Harlan County Sheriff's Department. The lawsuit named unlawful detention, Fourth Amendment violations, and racial discrimination, and it held the department directly accountable for the 4 prior complaints that had been documented, dismissed, and never acted upon. The argument was straightforward. The institution's repeated failure to respond to a documented pattern created the conditions for what happened at Rosewood Grill. Frank DeLuca filed separately, citing unlawful intimidation of a private business owner on his own premises. The county's legal team reviewed the full evidence package, body camera footage, security recordings, 8 witness statements, and O'Brien's personnel file, and arrived at the only conclusion the material allowed. A trial was not survivable. They settled. The county paid James and David a combined $1,100,000. Frank received $900,000. The total settlement reached just under $2 million, paid by a county that had been given 4 documented chances to prevent the morning at Rosewood Grill and had declined every one of them. Then James and David made a decision that no one anticipated. They donated the entire settlement, every dollar. Half went to a civil rights legal defense organization that provides representation to victims of racially biased policing who cannot afford attorneys. The other half funded a scholarship program for young black men pursuing careers in law enforcement. No press conference. No statement read from a podium. A short written release, distributed quietly, that said the following: they had badges. Most people who encounter what they encountered on that Tuesday morning have nothing to show. The money belonged to the ones who walked away from those encounters without anything to pull out of their jacket. The announcement surprised people who expected the story to end at the settlement figure. It did not end there. It redirected. Harlan County implemented mandatory bias awareness training for every active deputy. A new review protocol required supervisory sign-off on any identification check conducted without documented probable cause. An independent civilian review board was established with specific authority to investigate complaints involving racial profiling. Body camera footage became subject to quarterly audits designed to identify patterns before they produced incidents. 2 other deputies, each carrying complaint histories that tracked closely with O'Brien's, were removed from patrol and reassigned. Rosewood Grill stayed open. Frank kept the booth near the back window. James and David came back on Tuesday mornings. The food was the same. The coffee arrived before they asked for it. Near the register, Frank hung a small framed sign the week after the settlement was finalized. It read, "Served with dignity, no exceptions." He has not taken it down. Kevin O'Brien has not worked in law enforcement since. Here is what the morning at Rosewood Grill actually demonstrated. 2 detectives, men with badges, state authority, and a combined 25 years of service, were treated as criminals during a routine breakfast because of the color of their skin. They had the credentials to stop it. They had the institutional backing to document it. They had the legal standing to pursue it. And they still had to sit in a booth and wait for a sheriff to reach for his handcuffs before anyone in a position of authority intervened. Most people do not have what James and David had. Most people who encounter what they encountered on that Tuesday morning walk away without recourse, without documentation, without anything that makes the institution respond. Those are the people the settlement money went toward. Those are the people this story is about. Stories like this do not produce change by existing. They produce change by being seen by enough people, loudly enough, and for long enough that institutions can no longer manage the distance between what is documented and what is ignored.
If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who would appreciate it, and let's keep building this community together. And before you go, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what stood out to you the most. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next.